South Africa's foreign policy stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been under serious scrutiny since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Over the last couple of months, government has been sending high-level delegations to the United States and the Kremlin to try and broker a peace deal. Now, this week, President Ramaphosa spoke to Putin and briefed him on the peace mission that will be led by African leaders to Ukraine and Russia. Let's get some analysis now on where these meetings could likely take the situation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Is it likely to succeed? We speak now to author and journalist John Matisson, who talks to us from the Western Cape. John, good morning to you and thank you for your time. Let's begin with the understanding that President Ramaphosa in mid-June is going to depart for Russia and Ukraine alongside other African presidents in order to broker peace. Do you think that this could be the thing that really brings the two sides together? This could be the meeting?
Ollie, I'd love to think so. I think any time there's a peace effort, it should be welcomed. But I find it hard to believe it's going to succeed. I think the timing, there's a major counteroffensive just about to take place on the battlefield. Certainly the Ukrainians feel slighted by South Africa, so they're unlikely to want to give us such a major credit when there are other mediators around. So I'm doubtful. Obviously, I'd love it to succeed, but I'm doubtful.
And as we talk about these peace efforts, John, we know that the situation on the ground continues to worsen. And I'm talking about a dam that has been decimated, and I think neither side wanting to take responsibility, in particular Russia. Do you think that things are being ratcheted up on the ground, that it might actually make the two sides even more resistant to come to a negotiating table?
Well, not exactly that. I think, in the end, everybody knows there's got to be a settlement, but the situation on the battlefield is not right for it, I don't think. Ukraine has been planning for 6-8 months for a major counteroffensive once the weather permitted, and the weather is now permitting. They've got their Western arms input in place. They've trained their troops, and they've started a counteroffensive across a fairly wide front. And we don't yet know what the main focus of it will be. They're keeping that secret. So for me, obviously what's going on the battlefield takes priority for Ukraine and probably for Russia.
Let's look at matters on the domestic front, John. The South African rand somewhat regaining strength, and some of the observers saying that it is possibly the news coming out that South Africa may let go of the Brics summit in terms of hosting it and possibly give it away to another country to host. And this is on the back of the latest news, John, that President Ramaphosa is going to be talking to his Chinese counterpart. Do you think that the South African government will actually let go of the hosting of this Brics summit after such strident remarks from our international relations minister, who is very steadfast that this summit will take place here?
Well, for all the strident talk, Polly, it looks like behind the scenes the government is looking for a way out. They're talking to the Chinese and the Russians, and the options they're considering are either handing it over to China or co-hosting with China, or having Putin not come, or having Putin on a video conference call. But those are the signals they're starting to send, because they're realizing that the damage they're doing is enormous. In Washington, the mood towards South Africa has changed considerably in the last 6 weeks or so. About 3 months ago, people were still saying, oh, it doesn't matter, South Africa's not too bad. We don't mind them criticizing us and so on. But attitudes have hardened there, and what we face, which is really serious and is reflected in the decline of the rand, is that in 2025, the African Growth and Opportunity Act comes up for renewal in the Congress in the United States. And the mood in Washington is turning against us. And if we lose that, we lose an enormous amount of jobs in South Africa because of our lost exports. And our exports to the US and Europe are high value add. That means they create a lot of jobs in South Africa. So losing that would be a very serious blow to us.
That hardened attitude from Washington towards South Africa, do you think it is responsible for a somewhat change of tone and, I might dare say, attitude from the South African government? Because the Secretary General of the party, the ANC, which has actually been the one that is steadfast that Russia is our friend and you are not going to tell us who is our friend and who isn't. The Secretary General there suggesting that, look, if it means that there be a virtual conference that President Putin attends virtually, perhaps that could be an option. Do you think that that actually is one of the realities, that this conference or this summit might actually be held virtually for all presidents?
Well, I think that the attitude of the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, has shifted. He gave an interesting interview in the Sunday Times this week, where he seemed to be changing his ground on a number of issues. And I think he's changing his ground on this because it's very serious. I wrote in a piece in News 24 that I described this as an act of national self-harm, equivalent to what happened when the United Kingdom got out of the EU in Brexit. And it's done enormous damage to the British economy, and they don't know how to get out of it. And I think this is a similar situation. If we lose this ground, it takes a very long time to get it back. And I think the ANC has started to realize that. If you saw that, President Ramaphosa has nominated a couple of envoys to go off to Western capitals, and the Western capitals are saying our envoys can't see the presidents or the prime ministers. They're not even sure that they can see all the foreign ministers. Suddenly their schedules are full. Well, I think the West is trying to signal that we accept that South Africa doesn't have to agree with America, that the West has made serious errors. Iraq was a very serious error, and it's not the only one.
Yeah.
But when you come to a Russian invasion of Ukraine, such a brutal and violent violation of sovereignty of a sovereign state, and we can't find it in ourselves to be clear and unambiguous, that's a step too far for them.
You speak of an act of self-harm by South Africa, yes, but you've also been writing of the only way out for South Africa. That piece landing on the News 24 website yesterday on the 8th of June. What is the way out, the only way out for South Africa?
Probably the only real way out, which is for both our values and our national interests, is to call a spade, to say that the Russian invasion was wrong, unequivocally. It was a breach of international law. They are violating human rights, and they need to withdraw. Now, that doesn't mean they will withdraw, but it's in line with our moral values and with our interests. Because too many people that matter to us in the West and in many countries, Japan included, just see our attitude as incomprehensible. How can we be ambiguous about something as clear cut as that?
Why do you think that this has been so difficult for South Africa to do? And I'm asking it in the context of the Brics nations. Some of them have voted for that UN General Assembly which condemned Russia for invading Ukraine. What is it about South Africa that makes it see itself as somewhat either special or perhaps its hands are tied? It cannot betray Russia for, I guess, the help the ANC combatants received during the days of the struggle against apartheid.
Well, of course, you're right. Brazil, China, and India take their own positions. They support Russia in some areas and they oppose it in others. And we need to do the same. I think, frankly, the fact that the Soviet Union supported the ANC is a factor, but I think it's exaggerated. Of course, as you know, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and many of our combatants were trained in Ukraine, in Odessa. So that is not a logical argument in itself. I think one of the important things is that a Russian oligarch by the name of Vekselberg is now very active in South Africa. He has a manganese mine. He's gone into partnership with Chancellor House, part of the ANC's financial funding, and he's given 25 million rand in support to the ANC, which has helped pay for their staff. And as you know, their staff were on strike because they weren't being paid. Sure. So I think that's playing a real role. But I think beyond all that, I think South Africa's leadership seemed to me to be a bit out of touch. You don't have to take America's side on everything to recognize that Putin is he's not a Democrat. People who oppose him die violently. Investigative journalists die violently. People can't oppose him. He's taken control of the television stations and pushed out the previous owners and put them into friendly hands. This is not someone you can afford to blindly follow, even though, of course, our national interest requires us to deal with Russia, just like we deal with lots of countries.
I want to conclude the conversation, John, on this final question, and you've already touched on it. Foreign policy. I spoke with Professor Nick Binedell earlier this week, and he spoke along the same vein that foreign policy dictates that, first and foremost, you look at your country's national interests. You put those ahead of anything. And importantly, could this be the reason that the president this week has huddled around the table with some of South Africa's CEOs who clearly are concerned about their business interests? Again, we speak of this changing tone and attitude of the South African government towards this.
Yes, Colin, I think that's exactly right. People have forcefully brought to the attention of government, and I think it's some of us writing in the media and experts, but also especially business leaders that you described, who are saying this is a crisis. And of course, you've seen the fall of the rand. All of these factors have been sufficiently severe for the president and the cabinet to realize that this is not one of those things they can just ignore.
John Matisson, let me thank you very much for your time and analysis. Quite incisive indeed. He is an author and a journalist talking to us from the Western Cape.